It was a bright morning in Delhi. The National Science and Innovation Summit had brought together minds from across the country. Banners fluttered, cameras rolled, and the auditorium was filled with eager faces waiting to witness something historic. The guest list was long, filled with pioneers, educators, and inventors. Sundar Pichai was there too, seated quietly in the second row, but one seat in the front row remained empty. The name card read, Lakshmi Pichai. People whispered. Camera lenses zoomed in. The stage was ready, the flags stood tall behind the podium, and yet the absence was loud. Narendra Modi was scheduled to speak at noon, but even he paused backstage, glancing at the list again. The woman who had helped shape generations of minds was not in her place. Lakshmi Pichai was no ordinary guest. She was the retired school teacher who had once inspired her son Sundar to dream beyond the narrow lanes of Madaro. She had done more than just teach science. She had taught children to believe in their own worth. Over 4 decades of service, her students had gone on to become doctors, engineers, and leaders. But she had stayed behind, rooted in humility, content with planting seeds she would never see grow. So why was she missing? Sundar's eyes scanned the rows again. His face showed no panic, only confusion. He had spoken to her that morning. She had sounded happy, a little nervous, but ready. She had even laughed when he reminded her not to wear her old green shawl. "I'll wear the blue one, Beta," she had said. "The one you gave me last Diwali. People will think I'm somewhat important." But now, as the lights dimmed and the anchor took the mic, her seat stayed cold. Sundar reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone. He texted, then called. No answer. Outside, in the parking lot, a car had pulled in an hour ago, a small white hatchback. The driver had been asked to bring Mrs. Pichai from her hotel. But when he knocked, there was no response. He had assumed she had left with her family. No one questioned it. Meanwhile, Lakshmi sat alone. She was not in danger, not hurt, not angry, but she was lost, not in the physical sense but emotionally. Sitting quietly on a park bench near India Gate, she clutched the blue shawl in her lap and stared ahead. Children played nearby. A vendor passed by, offering sweet corn. She smiled politely and shook her head. Her phone vibrated inside her purse. But she didn't reach for it. She had seen the missed calls. She had read the messages. Her son was looking for her. The organizers were probably panicking, but something inside her didn't allow her to go. It had started earlier that morning. When she stepped out of the hotel lobby, she heard 2 people whispering near the reception. "Isn't she the mother of that Google guy?" "Yeah, but why is she even invited? What did she do herself?" She didn't confront them. She just kept walking. But those words cut deep. Not because they were cruel, but because she had asked herself the same question before. What had she done? Was her presence on the guest list just a courtesy, a formality to honor her son? Was she there because of who she raised, not who she was? So she walked, past the crowds, past the waiting car, and into the quiet parts of the city. She hadn't meant to miss the event. She just needed time to think, to breathe, to ask herself whether she belonged. Back at the venue, the anchor called out names. Awards were presented. Applause echoed. But when they reached the Lifetime Impact Award, the one reserved for Lakshmi Pichai, there was an awkward silence. Modi ji walked up to the mic. He looked at the audience, then at the seat, and then he said something no one expected. "Before I speak today, I want to ask a question," he said gently. "Where is Lakshmi Pichai?" The hall went silent. Sundar stood up slowly. His voice cracked as he answered, "We're not sure, sir. She's missing." Modi looked thoughtful. "We cannot go ahead without her. We will wait, because respect is not just about titles or fame. It is about recognizing those who build without needing applause." He stepped back. The music stopped. The event paused. The spotlight moved away from the stage, and the whole nation waited, a teacher who had always put others first. Meanwhile, Lakshmi finally reached into her purse. Her fingers trembled. The shawl slipped off her lap. She looked down at the phone. Sundar had sent a message. Uma, they're waiting for you. Not because of me, because of you. She stared at it for a long time. Then slowly, she stood up, and she began to walk. This was only the beginning. Lakshmi Pichai clutched the blue shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked back toward the summit venue. The sun was stronger now, the streets busier, but she moved with quiet determination. Her steps were slow, thoughtful, but steady. She didn't call for a cab or reach out to the organizers. Something told her she needed this walk. It was not just a return to the stage, it was a return to herself. As she passed through the quiet lanes near Lodi Gardens, memories came back like soft winds. The first school she ever taught in was nothing more than a cracked building with no fan and a single blackboard. Children sat on mats, shoes piled at the door. Her salary had barely covered bus fare, but her joy never came from money. It came from their eyes wide, curious, hungry to learn. One student had cried when he solved a math problem for the first time. Another had hugged her when he passed his board exams. She still remembered their names. Rajiv, Meena, Sarfaraz, Anu, Andy. Now she was walking to an event where those same hands that once scribbled letters on rough paper now built satellites, wrote code, ran hospitals, and still somewhere deep in her heart, she had let doubt steal her confidence this morning. Near the roundabout, she paused by a chiwala's stall. The smell of ginger tea and cardamom filled the air. Oma ji chai? The young man asked kindly. Lakshmi smiled. No beta, but thank you. He paused, then tilted his head. You look familiar. Are you Lakshmi Pichai? She hesitated. Yes. He stood up straighter. My mother told me about you. She used to attend your free evening classes in Madurai when she was young. She said you taught her how to fill out bank forms. You helped her open her first account. Lakshmi blinked. Your mother is Raji. Yes. He grinned. I'm her son Vinod. I run this stall now. She's the reason I got to finish school. Lakshmi's heart swelled. She nodded, tears pressing behind her eyes. Your mother was a very smart girl. Vinod poured a small cup of tea and handed it to her. This one's on me, Oma ji, for all you've given. As she sipped the warm tea, Lakshmi felt something soften inside her. It was not just memory, it was purpose. Meanwhile, back at the venue, the tension grew. Journalists whispered. Twitter exploded with the hashtag find LAKSHMIPICHAI. Some speculated illness, others worried about security. But those who knew her best understood it wasn't fear keeping her away. It was humility. Sundar sat still, elbows on his knees, head bowed. The only thing louder than the silence around him was the pounding of his heart. His father leaned over and whispered, She come, beta. She always comes when it matters. On stage, Prime Minister Modi had stepped down and taken a seat in the second row. His schedule was packed. A foreign delegation was waiting, but he refused to continue. Instead, he watched the door, and then quietly, without fanfare, it opened. Lakshmi stepped into the room. The guards looked confused. The ushers rushed forward. Someone offered to escort her. She politely refused. Her eyes scanned the hall. Everyone stood. Sundar ran to her. No words were exchanged. He just hugged her tightly. She placed a gentle hand on his cheek, nodded once, and began walking to her seat. The empty front row seat waited for her, as if it had known she would return. Modi ji stood as she walked past. He joined his palms in respect. Lakshmi did the same, her voice steady and warm. Thank you for waiting. He replied with a smile. We weren't waiting for a guest. We were waiting for our teacher. The audience clapped, but it wasn't loud. It was heartfelt, slow, rising like a wave of respect rather than noise. Lakshmi sat down. The lights dimmed again. The anchor took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "please, welcome to the stage, the heart behind 1,000 minds, Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai." Lakshmi looked uncertain, but Sundar leaned over and whispered, "Go on, Uma. They want to hear from you, not from me, not from anyone else, just you." She stood slowly and walked toward the stage. Each step echoed with memories, chalk dust, laughter, the sound of rain on the tin roof of her old school, the smell of ink on worn notebooks, a child raising their hand for the first time. When she reached the mic, she paused. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "I don't know if I deserve this," she began, "but I have learned one thing in my life. When you teach with love, you never walk alone. Your students walk with you. They carry you farther than you ever dreamed. And sometimes, they bring you all the way back to remind you that you matter." Tears filled many eyes, and somewhere in the back row, a young intern whispered to her colleague, "I want to be like her." Lakshmi smiled, not because of the applause, not because of the award waiting in the Prime Minister's hands, but because for the first time that day she believed she had earned her place. Lakshmi Pichai stepped down from the stage slowly, her hands still warm from shaking so many others. Reporters leaned forward, cameras followed her, but she remained calm. She smiled politely, offered a soft namaste, and walked back to her seat. Without rushing, as she sat, the Prime Minister turned to her and said quietly, "You reminded us of something we often forget, that greatness does not always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes, it sits in the back row, quietly building the future." Lakshmi replied with folded hands, "Thank you, but I only did what every teacher dreams of. I watched my children grow." The program resumed, but something in the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer about achievements or speeches. It was about people, about stories, about the hands that helped others rise, even if they never rose themselves. After the summit ended, a private room was prepared for tea with the dignitaries. Lakshmi had been invited too, but she sat in a corner away from the crowd, sipping her tea and watching her son speak with diplomats. She didn't want attention. She was content. But then a young woman approached her nervously. She wore a formal suit, a badge that read research assistant, and eyes that shone with nervous energy. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you," she stammered. "You don't know me, but you taught my aunt back in Madurai. My aunt always said, if you ever meet Lakshmi, ma'am, touch her feet for me." Lakshmi smiled and shook her head. "No need for that, beta. Just tell her, I remember her. She passed away last year," the girl said softly, "but I came here today to complete her wish." Lakshmi's eyes softened. She gently placed her hand on the girl's head. "Then you already have." As the girl walked away, wiping her eyes, Sundar came over. Double quotes, "A-M-M-A. Are you okay?" She nodded. "I am, but this day is too big for me." Sundar sat beside her and held her hand. "No, this day was too small without you. Now it feels whole." They sat in silence for a moment, but behind them, something unusual happened. The Prime Minister's personal assistant walked over to Lakshmi with a formal envelope. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "Modi ji would like to invite you to the National Education Roundtable next week as the keynote speaker." Lakshmi stared at the envelope. "Keynote speaker?" she asked softly. "But I am retired." "That's exactly why, ma'am," the assistant said. "He believes voices like yours matter more than ever." Lakshmi hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope. "Please tell him." "I will think about it." The assistant nodded and left. Sundar watched her closely. You don't have to do anything you don't want to." She nodded. "I know, but maybe it's time." That evening back in the hotel room, Lakshmi sat by the window, the blue shawl draped over her shoulders. She stared out at the city. Lights blinked in the distance, and the sounds of traffic hummed like a soft lullaby. Her phone buzzed. She had received over 200 messages from her students, news channels, teachers from across the country. Her name was trending on social media. She opened one message. It was a photo, a small boy holding a hand-drawn card that said, "Thank you, Teacher Lakshmi." She smiled. Then another message came, and another. They were all from people she had never met. Mothers, students, teachers, even a young man who said, "I grew up poor, but my mother kept your photo in her kitchen and always said she can, you can." Lakshmi's hands trembled. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about fame. It was about the quiet lives we touch without knowing. And suddenly, her mind went back to the boys at the hotel reception. What did she do herself? They had said. Lakshmi whispered to herself, "I taught. That is what I did." She stood up slowly, walked to the small desk, and opened the envelope. Inside was the formal invite. She read it carefully. Then she picked up the hotel's pen and wrote a short response on the back of the envelope. "Dear Prime Minister, thank you for the honor. I accept, but only if I can speak on behalf of every teacher who taught without recognition, every woman who raised her family and forgot her own name, every elder who shaped the future with nothing but love. Let this be for them, not just for me." With gentle hands, she sealed the reply and handed it to the front desk the next morning. The receptionist looked surprised. "Shall I arrange delivery, ma'am?" "No need," Lakshmi said with a smile. "The Prime Minister's office will know it's from me." In the Prime Minister's office later that day, the envelope was placed gently on his desk. He read the message slowly, then placed it beside a photo of his old school teacher. He turned to his secretary and said, "Prepare the round table differently. No titles, no ranks, just stories. Let Lakshmi Pichai speak first, and let everyone else listen like students." The secretary nodded, and just like that, one woman's quiet strength began to echo far beyond that stage, into offices, into homes, into classrooms yet to be built. The morning of the National Education Roundtable came with a calm breeze over Delhi. The halls of the event center were lined with tall glass windows and quiet confidence. Banners of the event read, "Voices of the Future, Shaping India's Classrooms." Today, officials, ministers, scientists, and educators walked in wearing suits, saris, and badges. But there was one chair on stage that stood out, simple, wooden, with no special backrest. It had been placed intentionally, and on the placard in front of it, a name written in soft black font, "Lakshmi Pichai, teacher." Madurai retired while others spoke of research, funding, and policies. The whispers grew louder about her. Will she speak? Will she be formal? Will she even show up? And then quietly, just like before, Lakshmi walked in. This time, she wore her old green shawl, the one Sundar had teased her about. She had decided it would remind her of where she came from. As she entered the auditorium, people stood not because of her title, but because of the story she had come to represent. She didn't rush to the stage. She paused to greet the cleaning staff. She smiled at the interns by the water dispenser. She even complimented a young girl's braid. These small acts made the room feel less like a summit and more like a classroom. Prime Minister Modi welcomed everyone and said, "Today we will hear not from those who manage education, but from those who lived it." He looked directly at Lakshmi and gave a slight nod. Then he sat down. The mic was placed in front of her. Lakshmi took a breath. "Namaste," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I did not come here to give a speech. I came to tell a story. Not mine, but the story of people like me. The invisible ones." The room fell silent. She continued, "I taught for 40 years. I never had a projector in my class. We used chalk and a slate. We had no electricity sometimes. When it rained, we used buckets to catch the leaks. But the children came. every day, even if they were hungry, even if their clothes were torn. She looked at the ministers in the front row. I taught them not because I had answers, but because I believed they could find them. A man in a suit leaned forward, listening closely. I remember one student, Lakshmi said. His father was a laborer. His mother made food at a temple. He would come to school barefoot, but with a question every day. Now he runs a medical clinic. He sends me a postcard every New Year. Someone in the crowd wiped their eyes. My son is here too, she said, glancing toward Sundar, who sat quietly in the middle row. You all know him, but to me, he is still the little boy who used to get excited over making paper boats float in the puddles after school. The room chuckled gently. He once asked me, Amma, what is success? I told him it is when someone remembers your words years after you've forgotten saying them. Her fingers tightened gently around the edge of the podium. But today, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I want to talk about something more important than recognition. I want to talk about forgotten teachers. The ones who never won awards. The ones who stitched their own chalk bags. Who walked miles to remote villages. Who sat with children after hours. Who retired quietly, with no pension, but full hearts. A hush fell over the room. Lakshmi took a deep breath. We must build schools, yes. We must give books, yes. But we must also restore dignity. Dignity to those who teach not just in cities, but in far-off hills and villages. Don't just fund the future, she said firmly. Respect the past. When she finished, she looked down for a moment. Her eyes were moist, but she didn't cry. She walked back to her seat. The room erupted not in polite claps, but in thunderous, standing applause. Modi ji stood first, then the education minister. Then every person in that room, even the camera crew, paused their work to join. Lakshmi sat down slowly, surprised. But the surprise didn't end there. After the applause, the Prime Minister walked to the mic again. I had a speech prepared, he said, with a small smile. But I won't read it today, because Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai has already spoken the words the nation needed to hear. He paused, then added, from this day, we are introducing a new initiative, Guru Samman Yojana, a recognition and support program for retired teachers across rural India. A screen lit up behind him with the announcement. Lakshmi looked stunned. He turned to her and said, You reminded us what we had forgotten. So now, we remember. She simply joined her hands again and whispered, Thank you. Later that evening, news channels filled with her story. She was not just a mother anymore. She was a movement on social media. The trend shifted from hashtag find LAKSHMIPICHAI to hashtag thank you LAKSHMI. Children recorded short videos thanking their school teachers. Strangers wrote blogs about their first classroom memories. Local officials visited rural schools with new plans for benches and clean water. Lakshmi sat by her hotel window again that night, her old shawl still draped over her shoulders. She held a cup of tea and whispered, This was never about me. Then she smiled. This was always about them. Lakshmi Pichai returned to Madurai quietly. There was no grand welcome, no garlands or camera flashes, only the honking of rickshaws and the gentle rustle of trees as her cab rolled through the familiar lanes. The old house still stood the same, paint on the walls, clay pots near the front door, and the small tulsi plant she had watered for years. She stepped out, blue shawl around her shoulders this time, and looked up at the home where she had once stayed awake, correcting notebooks deep into the night. Her neighbor, Amma Janaki, saw her from across the street and came running. You were on the news, she exclaimed. We all watched. My grandson even clapped for you like you were a film star. Lakshmi laughed softly. Film star? No. Just an old teacher who forgot her seat for a moment. But she didn't stay long inside. Within days, she began receiving letters, not just from students, but from teachers across India. Most of them were handwritten, some smudged with ink and time. One was from a woman in Bihar who taught under a tree. Another was from a blind teacher in Meghalaya who had memorized her students' voices instead of their faces. Lakshmi read each one slowly, carefully, and replied to as many as she could. She didn't write long letters, just small notes, filled with warmth. You are seen, you are not forgotten, you matter. Across the country, things were beginning to change. Schools that were once ignored began receiving visits from local officials. Small classrooms got new chalkboards. In the hills of Uttarakhand, a group of students painted a mural on their school wall with her face and the words, "Thank you, teacher." At a railway station in Kerala, a tea vendor, who had been a dropout, once told a journalist, "She spoke like my mother, and I cried, because I never got to thank my teacher before she passed." In Delhi, the Guru Samman Yojana was launched officially. Teachers in remote villages received healthcare benefits for the first time. Forgotten pensions were restored, and more importantly, letters of gratitude were mailed from students, schools, and even the Prime Minister's office. Lakshmi watched all this unfold from her veranda, but she never called it her victory. She told Sundar on the phone one evening, "Beta, it's like when you drop a pebble in a lake. I only dropped the pebble. The ripples are not mine to own." He smiled, sitting in his office in California. "Amma, you didn't drop a pebble. You dropped truth." One morning, Lakshmi received an invitation that made her pause. It was from a small government school in Tamil Nadu's dry southern plains. It read, "Dear Lakshmi teacher, we are starting a library for the first time. There are only 20 books, but we have painted the walls and cleaned the floors. We would be honored if you would come cut the ribbon. It would mean everything to our students." Lakshmi didn't hesitate. She took a simple bus, not a car. When she arrived, the entire school had gathered. The students stood barefoot in clean uniforms. Garlands made of fresh jasmine hung from bamboo sticks. There was no red carpet, only a thin rug leading to a classroom where the library had been created. Lakshmi looked inside. Old newspapers stacked carefully, English and Tamil books donated from nearby towns. A small chart that read today's reader, tomorrow's leader. She smiled and took the scissors. Before she cut the ribbon, she asked softly, "May I say something?" The principal nodded. Laksh. Emma turned to the children. "This room may be small," she said, "but it holds every dream you could ever imagine. Read these books. Not just with your eyes, but with your hearts. Stories will take you where feet cannot." A girl in the front row whispered to her friend, "She sounds like Appa's grandmother," and somehow, that was the highest praise. Later that week, a new video began going viral online. Not from a news channel, not from a journalist, it was a blurry mobile clip. In it, Lakshmi sat on a plastic chair under a neem tree, surrounded by children. She read from an old book about a boy who grew up to invent things. She smiled at each child. She made them laugh, and at one point, she closed the book and said, "Remember, every big tree once began as a small, forgotten seed." The comments exploded. "This is the India we need. I'm crying. My teacher was just like her. We failed our teachers for too long. Thank you for reminding us." The next morning, Sundar called her again. "Oma," he said, "you've become a national voice now." She replied softly, "Then I must speak carefully, because voices can echo both kindness and harm." He paused. "You've changed the country." Lakshmi shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. "I didn't change the country, Beta," she said. "I just reminded it of something it already knew but had forgotten." That night, Lakshmi took out an old diary. Inside were pages filled with dates, names, and small memories of students over the years. She looked at them one by one. She didn't cry. She didn't feel regret. She only whispered, "May you all be happy. May you all rise higher than I ever could." Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, the old teacher slept with peace in her heart. The world had finally heard her voice, and more importantly, had listened. The National Teachers' Conclave was just 2 weeks away. It was to be held in Delhi again, but this time, it felt different. This time, the walls didn't display just faces of education ministers or institutional leaders. They also displayed the smiling photo of Lakshmi Pichai beneath the words, "One voice changed 1,000 minds." She had been invited as the closing speaker, not as a guest of honor, not as someone symbolic, but as a voice who had truly moved the nation. The event was set to be televised. Viewers from schools, colleges, and rural learning centers across India would be watching live. Lakshmi didn't ask for special arrangements. She packed her green shawl again, along with a small cotton bag that carried an old pen and a handwritten speech. Sundar offered to arrange a flight, but she preferred the train. "I want to see the country," she said, "not just arrive at it." During the train ride, teachers and students came to her compartment one by one. Some brought tiffin, others just words. An old man who once ran a school canteen in Ujjain said, "Your speech reminded me why I stayed in service for 27 years without a raise." A 12-year-old girl from Jhansi gave her a small notebook and said shyly, "Please write something for me." Lakshmi opened the book, thought for a moment, then wrote, "Believe in your own light, it will never betray you." By the time she reached Delhi, the bag felt heavier with all the gifts she had received, but her heart felt light. The event was grand. Banners fluttered, the air buzzed with energy, and the final session was set to begin. Lakshmi was seated beside the country's top education officials, but she remained quiet, humble, eyes lowered, smile constant. When her name was called, she walked up with no fuss. She didn't clear her throat or adjust the mic. She just spoke. "Namaste." She began, her voice steady. "Thank you for letting a teacher speak one last time. I have taught all my life, but I have also learned from children, from parents, from quiet afternoons spent under trees waiting for late buses." She paused. "My greatest lesson," she continued, "is this: if you want to raise a great nation, don't start with budgets, start with belief." The room was silent. We live in a time where success is measured in digits, but let me remind you some of the brightest stars began in dark villages, with no internet, no fancy buildings, only hope. She looked directly at the audience. "Do not give our children only technology, give them dignity. Do not give our teachers only guidelines, give them gratitude." She paused again. The room held its breath. "And do not forget the smallest voice in the back of the classroom may one day carry the whole country forward." Applause rose not instantly, but gradually. It began with one teacher, then another, until the whole hall stood, not just out of respect, but because they had learned something, not from a book but from a life after the event. As the sun began to set over Delhi, Lakshmi stood alone on the terrace of her hotel, watching birds cross the evening sky. A young anchor from a news channel came running up the stairs, breathless. "Ma'am," she asked softly, "can I ask you one last question before you go back home?" Lakshmi turned gently. "Of course." The girl hesitated, then said, "If you had one message for every girl in every small town who thinks she's invisible, what would it be?" Lakshmi looked into the sky, then said slowly, "You are not invisible. You are waiting to be seen. And one day, the world will have no choice but to see your light." Back in Madurai, weeks later, a quiet ceremony took place outside Lakshmi's old school. A new plaque had been placed near the gate. It didn't list her awards or her son's name. It simply said, "In honor of Lakshmi Pichai, who taught us not what to think, but how to believe." Children walked past it every day. Some stopped to read it, some did end single quotes, but the message stayed. Months passed. The ripples she created kept spreading. More teachers were honored quietly across the country. More children began speaking proudly of their educators. And in homes once filled with silence, people sat down to talk about values again, not just marks, not just money, but respect, kindness, and hope. One evening, as Lakshmi watered her tulsi plant under a pink sky, Sundar called her. AMMA, he said, the UN thinks your speech should be shared globally at their education summit next year. Lakshmi smiled. I will write them a letter, she said, but let someone younger speak this time. My voice has done its part. You sure? He asked. Yes, she replied softly, because real teaching means knowing when to let others lead. Sundar didn't argue, because he understood. Her final lesson had already been taught, not with a CHALKBOARD, not with a mic, but with a life lived fully, simply, and truthfully, and somewhere. In the corner of a small classroom, a child sat reading aloud the story of a teacher from Madurai, once missed her seat in the front row, only to rise and give voice to a nation's conscience. It was early morning in Madurai. The sky was soft with shades of peach and gray. Sparrows chirped near the temple steps. A gentle breeze moved through the narrow lanes like an old friend, greeting every doorway. In her small kitchen, Lakshmi Pichai was boiling tea. She moved slowly now, not because of weakness, but with the grace of someone who no longer rushed through moments. Each motion was deliberate. She stirred the tea leaves, poured the steaming liquid into 2 cups, and placed one. Beside her, her neighbor, Amma Janaki, sat opposite her, wrapped in a faded shawl. You've become famous, Lakshmi, she teased, but you're still making tea like nothing's changed. Lakshmi smiled, because the kettle still whistles the same way. They both laughed. Since the speech in Delhi, life had changed around Lakshmi, but not inside her. The mailbox filled more often. Students she hadn't heard from in decades sent letters, photos of families, and handwritten stories about how her lessons had stayed with them. A young girl named Ria from Kashmir wrote, "You gave me permission to believe in myself. I want to be a teacher like you." Lakshmi kept that letter pinned above her desk, but today was different. Today, she was going back to her old school. One final time, not for a speech, not for an award, but for a quiet event, something she had personally requested. She had asked for a small garden to be built at the back of the school, near the banyan tree where she used to sit with students during breaks. She wanted it to be a place for reflection, a place for silence, a place where children could sit and simply be. She called it the listening garden. When she arrived, children greeted her with folded hands. The principal walked beside her, holding a small plate with fresh jasmine. "You sure you don't want cameras, ma'am?" he asked. Lakshmi shook her head. Let this moment belong to the children, not to the headlines. The garden was simple. 3 benches under a curved shade, a small path with pebbles, plants with labels: patience, curiosity, kindness, truth, and, in the middle, a stone seat with one line carved on it. Sit here, and listen not to the world, but to your own heart. Lakshmi sat on that stone and closed her eyes. The wind blew softly through the leaves. A butterfly landed on the kindness plant, and in that stillness, the world felt complete. A few days later, Sundar visited. He wore simple clothes, no bodyguards, no press. Just the sun returning to his roots. He helped Amma water the plants. He sat cross-legged on the veranda, as she told him stories from when he was little. They ate dosa and coconut chutney, and laughed like it was yesterday. As the sun set, Sundar turned serious. AMMA, he said. They want to name an international award after you. They're asking what to call it. Lakshmi looked surprised. Me? Yes. Something about inspiring education. What should we name it? She thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Call it the Invisible Hands Award." Sundar raised an eyebrow. Because the best teachers, she explained, are like invisible hands. They hold you, shape you, and lift you without ever needing to be seen. Months passed. The garden grew. The award was launched, and won by 1. Stories from forgotten corners of India came forward of teachers in boats in flooded villages, of grandmothers teaching under street lamps, of retired women starting night schools for girls who had dropped out. Lakshmi watched it all unfold quietly from her home, but time, as always, moved forward. Her steps grew slower, her handwriting smaller, and one night, as the moon rose bright, over Madura she sat at her desk and wrote a final letter. She addressed it to no one in particular. Inside it, she wrote, "If you're reading this, know that I believed in you, even before you believed in yourself. If you ever feel small, remember, whisper can move mountains, if spoken with love. And if you ever feel unseen, be like the sun, rise anyway." She folded the letter and placed it inside the last page of her diary. Lakshmi Pichai passed away peacefully in her sleep. Weeks later, there were no loud announcements, only a quiet ripple that moved through the hearts of millions. Sundar lit the lamp beside her photo and whispered, "You taught the world without ever needing a classroom." Today, the listening garden still blooms. Children sit there during recess and write letters, not to send, but to express. Teachers sit there after long days and breathe in stillness. And every year, one unknown teacher from anywhere in the world receives the Invisible Hands Award, a small medal, a handwritten note, and a whisper that says, "You matter. You always did." Lakshmi's story did not end in applause. It ended in hearts, and that perhaps is the most lasting place a story can live.